Hello everybody and welcome to the Sugar Free Show with myself, Karen Thomson, and nutritionist Emily Maguire. Today we are so excited to have the amazing low carb dietitian Franziska Spritzler with us. Franziska is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator who takes a carbohydrate-restricted whole foods approach to managing diabetes and insulin resistance. She works in private practice in Huntington Beach, California, nice, and has been following a low-carb lifestyle since 2012. Franziska is also a freelance writer whose articles have been published online and in diabetes journals and magazines. And in January last year, she published her first book, The Low Carb Dietitian's Guide to Health and Beauty. Welcome!
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm so happy to be here. And hello, Emily.
Hi, I'm very excited to be back, and I'm very excited that we have you as our first guest of the year. So I'm just going to launch right into it, and I think the first question that you probably get quite a lot as well is, how does a dietitian come to get into low carb? What is kind of the story behind it?
Okay, very good question. Yes. So I became a dietitian a little later. I went back to school and became a dietitian in 2008, and I was practicing as a traditional dietitian, you know, pretty low fat, kind of pescatarian approach, and I thought I was doing great. I thought if everyone ate the way I did, they would have perfect blood sugar and everything would be fine. And in 2011, I did some lab work for life insurance. And when the labs came back, you know, my cholesterol was high, which is not unusual for me, but I was really surprised to see that they had flagged one of the markers as elevated, and it was fructosamine. And fructosamine, some people have never heard of this. It's a measure of blood sugar control for a very short period, 2 to 3 weeks. And the hemoglobin A1C, which more people are familiar with, that one measures blood sugar over a 3-month period. So the fructosamine was elevated, and because of that, they did an A1C. My husband's fructosamine was fine. They didn't even do an A1C on him. My A1C was 5.6, which isn't terribly high, but the fact that the fructosamine was high and my A1C was really a lot higher than I thought it should be got me to thinking, wait a minute, maybe I have some blood sugar issues going on. So I bought a glucometer and started testing my blood sugar after meals. Oh, I didn't say that my fasting blood sugar was completely normal, about 80, which is normal. But after eating, I found that eating just you know, a very healthy mixed meals with like a brown rice and some fish and vegetables, my blood sugar was still going up to 160, 180. And, you know, I used to know the conversion for what that is for people who are not in America, and I can't remember now, but it was definitely much higher than it should have been. So that got me to focus on finding out what people with diabetes and prediabetes were doing to manage their blood sugar, and I found that people who had good control were following some level of carbohydrate restriction. So I started doing research and found that there was a lot of literature supporting low carb for people with diabetes and prediabetes. So once I started cutting back on the carbs, I got my blood sugars back to normal levels after meals, and I started writing articles, I started my blog, and then at the end of 2013, I left to go into private practice. I was working at a VA hospital, and they weren't really very low-carb friendly, so I had to keep giving the standard guidelines while I was there, and I just didn't feel right about doing it anymore. I thought I could help people, truly help them manage their blood sugar if I told them, you know, to eat like I was. Before I was telling them eat like I'm eating, when I was following the guidelines, that actually wasn't working for me. So that's my story of how I came to it. Yeah.
I think it's quite often where a lot of, I suppose, the health professionals kind of find it, either by a personal story or a family kind of, you know, sort of history. And were you quite surprised by sort of the body of literature that you were able to find on carbohydrate restriction?
Absolutely, because, you know, all we're ever taught in school is that low carbohydrate diets can be dangerous and nobody can do them. So I just figured, well, there must be studies that show that. But there really aren't. The studies that are out there are showing that it can be done. There are amazing benefits beyond blood sugar control, but blood sugar control is certainly one of the main benefits of following a carbohydrate-restricted lifestyle. So I was amazed. And, since then, that was 2011, there have been so many other studies published. I have a list of research on my blog, and, every month I'm adding to it, and I'm just amazed at the amount of research that there is supporting this way.
Yeah, that's kind of coming out with it. So to get into exactly the diet, kind of the low carbohydrate diet, I think this is probably one of the sort of more gray areas, if you like, in terms of we don't have this kind of set definition or guideline, because obviously it's not like the standard guidelines are out there. So when you say low carbohydrate diet, what kind of does that mean to you, and how do you apply that to your sort of patient and client group?
I think it's a pretty broad range. Generally anywhere from probably as low as 20 grams a day up to 100 grams a day. I still consider low carb. Some people would disagree with that. They might say anything over 50 is really not that low. But, standard recommendations are like 200 grams or higher, and definitely the RDA is 130 grams or higher. So 100 grams is still pretty low. But I would say the majority of people that I work with, generally somewhere between probably 30 and 60 per day. And I find that tends to get the best results blood sugar wise, and people it's more easy to stick to than a strict 20 gram a day. 20 grams, you don't have a lot of room. If you go out to breakfast or something and have some vegetables, you may have to be really careful for the rest of the day. I just like having a little more variety. But for people who want to be very, very strict, I understand that. I can help people strategize ways to prepare foods that minimize carbohydrates as well.
And is there, so you said generally it's around about a 30 to 60 gram level that you maybe put clients on. Is there a certain type of person or a certain disease state, for example, that you would put at the lower end in comparison to higher, or how do you kind of determine that kind of range?
A lot of it is personal preference and what they're willing to do, but I would say for women that are like mid-40s and beyond, being closer to 30 grams is a lot easier. They see results more quickly because of the insulin resistance that occurs at this time. Again, I really think that's a lot of what I was experiencing was insulin resistance and having higher and higher blood sugars in response to the carbs. So I find that cutting back on them to 30 grams or so, maybe 40 is really like a sweet spot. But for people who have a very, very difficult time doing that long term, maybe alternating, having some days that are 30, some days that are closer to 60, and then they still get the benefits, and maybe just a couple days that they're running a little higher blood sugar. Other people want to be strictly controlled at all times, and that's what's important to them. So I really try to work with the individual. I don't fault anybody else for the approach of saying everyone should remain less than 30 grams so they can have ideal blood sugar all the time. That's true, but if it's too hard for them to sustain and they're going to give it up altogether, I would rather just do what I can to help the person have as healthy a lifestyle as they can do long term.
And when it comes to the let's say the most common pitfalls that people would have on kind of a low carbohydrate approach, what are the things that you generally see? And then also on the flip side of that, what are the things where people kind of stall or hit? This might be a two-part question, so we can break it down. It's a little bit too big. But so the first part, what would you say are most people's kind of pitfalls when they're following a low carbohydrate diet?
Okay, sometimes it's kind of an all or nothing approach where they're either really, really good and they're not, they're completely staying within the guidelines, and then they have a slip. This was very common at the holidays, and then it just gets them off course for 2 weeks. They're like, oh, I'll just start in January. That was very common. But having one meal or even one whole day where you eat off plan shouldn't derail you. The next morning, and you probably won't feel very good, but the next morning, if you get right up and have like breakfast of bacon, eggs, and some spinach, you're going to feel a lot better. You get right back on track. So I think having like a slip or a dietary indiscretion derail you completely, that's very common. And then this one is kind of answering both questions. I find that a lot of people are going too low carb, like they're becoming afraid of carbohydrates, and instead they're eating too much fat. And what that does is, especially women my age, we still have to worry about calories. It's not as simple as calories in, calories out, but, if we're saying, I can't tolerate vegetables, I need to keep my carbs very, very low, and I don't have room for vegetables, but I am going to have, these eggs with hollandaise sauce and, 3 tablespoons of cream in my coffee and, maybe something else, that is not going to help with weight loss, and it can even cause some problems with blood sugar too, because if you have very, very high intake of fat, that can cause some level of insulin resistance. So I like a really balanced approach where we're not fearing fat. Fat is good for you, but vegetables are good for you too, and having a really well-balanced approach that includes plenty of animal and plant foods, I think is best. And I find that some people, keto diets are very big now. Some people do great with them, but the message of, extreme amounts of fat can actually be detrimental to people's progress. And their satisfaction with the diet too, because it takes away some of the variety that you would get with a more balanced approach. With just, a few more carbohydrates, a little less fat, and I think you do better overall.
So when it comes to people, and I know you and I have even spoken about this before ourselves, and that we see a lot of people stalling because they do have this kind of notion and sort of idea that the more fat you add, the more weight that you'll lose. Can you just sort of try and, again, and it's not an easy topic at all because it's not just calories in equals calories out, but the calories will matter. There will have to come a point where, whatever stage it is on your journey, you will have to look at the calorie content. So how do people kind of identify if that is kind of a problem, and what can they kind of do, and sort of what's going on with the body as to why they maybe need to kind of cut back a little bit on the fat rather than add more of the fat?
Okay, no, those are great questions. And what I usually do is I have people do like a food diary, either online or their own food diary, and I do have them count up the calories that they're eating. They're often eating many, many more than they need. They're not realizing how much they're getting from the fat. Because I think somebody said once, well, it's that they're not eating enough. That can happen, but most people, they tend to end up eating more. They underestimate what they eat. And when they're really logging it carefully, they'll see that they're eating, too much, just too much. And it's true that, on a low carbohydrate diet, you want to be, burning fat for energy rather than sugar. But if you are eating more fat than you need, you're not going to be burning your body fat. You're going to be burning the fat that you need, and any that you don't need for energy is going to be stored as fat, just like any other excess of either protein or carbohydrates. Too much of anything is going to lead to stalls and possibly even weight gain. I've seen people gain weight on a ketogenic diet. I've seen people gain weight by adding, coconut oil increases ketone levels, and that's great. But if you add 5 tablespoons of coconut oil to your diet and don't change anything else, you'll have higher ketone levels, but you're also going to put on weight unless you're exercising, and using that energy. So, yeah, there are some misconceptions out there, and if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So eating all the fat you want, eating several thousand calories of fat in addition to your regular diet is not going to help you lose weight. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's when it comes back to our training back in the day. Sometimes it is just really taking it back to kind of basics and looking at everything that you are kind of consuming, and I think sometimes it's very easy for things to creep in without you realizing. And one thing we haven't touched on is protein. So what is your kind of take on protein, particularly with low carb, and how do you kind of gauge it for different population groups and such as well?
Yeah, I think protein is so important, and getting some protein at every meal too, because there's a certain amount of protein that you need in order to keep your muscle mass strong, and for all the enzymes in your body are made up of proteins. You need to be replacing the protein that you use every day. So protein is, I think, the most important nutrient. It's the only one your body can't make on its own. It can make fat and it can make carbohydrates. It can't make protein. So the amount of protein, that is so controversial. It does, really depend on the person. I usually go by, how tall they are, how old they are, activity, other health conditions. But generally, I'm more of a kind of higher protein person. It tends to satiate you too, even more than fat. Now, fat is filling, but protein actually is the most appetite-suppressing nutrient. You really can't overdo it on protein the way that you can on either fat or carbohydrates. So I recommend, for most women, somewhere between about 70 and 100 grams per day, maybe even more sometimes. And I'm definitely at the higher end of that. I feel best at that. Some women feel better at a little bit lower, and men can do higher. Men, often up to like 120, 140 grams a day. And that's, and as I said, kind of divided into equal amounts during the day. So that's one of my things about intermittent fasting I'm not a huge fan of, because if you're eating only one meal a day, there's no way you're going to be able to absorb and use 100 grams of protein at one time. If you're eating, a huge meal with lots of protein, you're maybe going to be able to use 50 grams, 40, 50 grams of that, and the rest of it is not going to be used. And the times when you need it, the other, other times of the day, you're not getting it for, for the muscles and for, all the other things that your body needs for growth and repair. So, yeah, that's so I snuck in my little take on intermittent fasting there. I think eating twice.
About to break. I was just about to get onto that one.
Well, I think twice a day. Skipping one meal a day and doing two, you can still make it work. But eating once a day, if you do it all the time, you're going to have some problems with protein, I think.
So just to kind of come on to the topic with fasting then, as we all three of us know, fasting has become quite a hot topic at the minute, and Karen and I have kind of we've had ladies been on with us on our courses and things, and I think sometimes when you get to that point where you've maybe stalled, or particularly if you've been on the low carbohydrate journey for quite a long period of time, it can get very frustrating, and plateaus are and can last quite a long time. So I think a lot of people have now been approaching the fasting aspect to help as another tool. But you've already kind of touched upon a little bit. So obviously the sort of length of fasting can affect protein intake, which particularly for females can have certain impacts within there. So what is your take on the kind of fastings where it's the 12 to 36 hour fasting, and then the kind of longer fasting that some people are now approaching with? Do you have certain opinions around those? Is there any pitfalls or kind of, I wouldn't say the word danger, but anything that people should look out for if they're trying to do something like that?
Yeah, so for 12 to 18-hour fasts, I think are just fine and can actually be helpful. You do end up doing some type of repair when you're not eating at all. So I said you need protein for repair, but you also need times where you're not eating. So I'm definitely not a fan of eating, like every 2 or 3 hours, but and going for a longer period of time is fine. When it gets beyond, I would say 20 hours or even 24 hours, then we start to see some problems, because then you do start to lose some muscle mass. And I've heard people say, well, after 3 days, you're not losing as much muscle mass. But you are starting to lose it for those 3 days, and you continue to lose it as long as the fast progresses. There's a few things I don't really like about fasting. Yes, you will definitely see weight loss, certainly, but some of it is water, some of it is muscle, some of it is bone. Actually, over time, you lose some of your bone mass as well when you're fasting and you're not getting the minerals that you need. And even if you take minerals by themselves, without protein and other foods, you're not going to be using them. It's tough. I understand, and the psychological benefits of fasting, where after a few days you're not hungry anymore, and it seems a lot easier to go on. But you're really in starvation mode, and it's not teaching you how to eat mindfully and healthfully. And just my book is called Low Carb Dietitian's Guide to Health and Beauty, and I hate to harp on the beauty aspect, but truly, if you're fasting a lot, you're going to be losing the collagen in your skin. You're going to be, you're not going to look good on the inside or the outside. and you're very likely to trigger binge eating once you're done with a fast. You know, you fast for 3 to 5 days. You know, at first you're not going to be able to eat that much. It's kind of like being sick. But then you get a rebound, you know, trigger to eat so much food. So then you end up doing like a feast and famine thing all the time, which is really unhealthy. You end up gaining the weight back, but you're usually not gaining back any of that muscle you lost. You're gaining back fat primarily. So that's, not a big fasting fan. If you are going to fast, I recommend doing it under doctor's supervision only, because certain things can happen. Arrhythmias with your heart. You know, you may have a condition you don't even know about before you fast that fasting could be detrimental for. People with diabetes, particularly people with type 1, absolutely no fasting unless you're under a doctor's care, because things can spiral out of control pretty quickly. So I just think that my heart goes out to people who are stalled with weight loss. It's easier for some people than others. Tends to be the most difficult for women. But I usually say, you know, just hang in there and really making peace with food and starting to see food as something that nourishes you rather than something to avoid and not eat for several days. That's going to be key to kind of, you know, healing your relationship with food and really starting to eat mindfully and getting the most out of nutrition, the most out of life.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon, because the one thing that I've kind of noticed with the fasting aspect is that a lot of everyone's talking about what you do during the fasting and how you do the fasting and, you know, other things you can have, but they don't necessarily talk about, you know, afterwards. So when you start to eat again or reintroduce food, there's no kind of talking about that. And I think you're really right, is that for some people, they obviously have certain issues with food, and that can then maybe trigger, you know, binging, or they're not really fixing or learning how to eat, you know, within that aspect. So, and they kind of bounce back, you know, with the food within there. I don't know if Karen jumped on to ask a question there, or and I know this topic for Karen and I was one that we've definitely kind of been playing back and forth with, because as we said, you know, we have had a lot of people who really just, you know, doing this because it does seem like that brand new kind of, you know, magic bullet basically, and really we know that that's kind of not the case with it. So Karen, did you have a question, or were you?
I think the problem is just that that people are seeing it as a quick fix. So nobody's willing to actually put in the effort and, you know, start a new lifestyle plan and stick with it for life. Everybody just wants to have like this immediate weight loss, this quick fix, and that's what bothers me. And having suffered from an eating disorder myself, I know how that would mess with my head. I would admit, I mean, that's my anorexic starvation mode that I go into when I go into fasting mode. So for me, or for anybody suffering from an eating disorder, it's very troubling. And what I've found in our programs is the ones wanting to try these things are the ones with these histories of anorexia and stuff, which is quite concerning to me, obviously. I want to know what's your take on sweeteners. We see a lot of people, especially in South Africa, recreating junk food. So essentially doing like muffins with loads of almond flour and stevia or xylitol. I'm not a fan. What do you have to say?
Okay, so this one is Emily knows. Emily stays. Okay, so this is really interesting. I run the gamut from, you know, not using them at all to using them constantly. I have used sugar substitutes my entire life, and I find that they can be beneficial for some people and harmful for others. So for people who it triggers, you know, cravings for other sweet foods, and they're unable to stay away from, you know, regular ice cream, or they're replacing healthy foods with only these sweet treats, like they're having muffins and those sorts of things. I basically use it in my coffee and tea. And as I said, Emily knows because Emily stayed with me, and I think I made us both.
Amazing. It's amazing.
And I put it in, and I said, "Oh, you can have this one, or I can have it." She said, "That's a little sweet." And I said, "Okay, I'll take this one." And that's just, you know, I like things either sweet or very, very sweet or not sweet at all. I can drink coffee with just cream, or I can drink coffee with cream and a lot of sweeteners. So for me, it's kind of, that's one area where I am kind of black or white. but I can do either one, and it's never affected my weight or my hunger, but I've seen other people where it has absolutely done this. And I don't make a lot of desserts, though. I don't do these muffins or anything like that. Sometimes I'll put it into like some cottage cheese and some nuts on it, but I can eat that without any sweetener too. So I really feel like it's individualized. I did want to talk about sugar just really briefly because this is something that I've never told. Remember when I said at the beginning about the fructosamine being elevated? So the fructosamine level measures your the amount of sugar that's bound to albumin, another protein in your blood, over a 2 or 3 week period of time. Well, I had this done in January of 2011, and for years, around the Christmas holidays, I would bake these cookies. Now, I've not had a problem with sugar and being addicted, and normally I could just have a little bite of my husband's cake or ice cream or whatever. However, when I made these cookies, they were gingerbread cookies and these shortbread cookies with jam. I would make them, and while I was making them, I would taste the batter. Any burnt cookies or broken cookies I would eat. I definitely had a lot of sugar over probably a 3 or 4 day period there around Christmas. And then I had my blood sugar drawn, for that lab. My labs drawn, and they tested the fructosamine. It was elevated to diabetes levels. So that tells you that during that period of time, even though my A1C over a 3-month period was still within the normal range, kind of higher end, I was definitely getting way too much sugar, and I understand that. That is the one time that I can understand like not being able to stop. You're addicted to sugar. It's so good you can't stop it, and so that was the last year I made those cookies. I've never made them since. Ever since I went low carb, all of my friends and family were disappointed, but I don't think it's healthy. I certainly always felt a little guilty about it, the way that I would eat, but yeah, so I thought about this morning when I was thinking, I've ever had a sugar problem, and I thought about the cookies, and then I thought, you know what though, maybe that's part of the reason my fructosamine was so high. I'm certain it wouldn't have been at other times of the year. So anyway, that's just a little something new to my story. Yes.
So, what's the deal with children? Do you recommend them going on low-carb diets? I mean, I've got 2 really active little boys. They're not fat. They're not obese. They don't have weight problems. They definitely have some behavioral issues, but I don't know if I can blame the food for that. I mean, what do you think, what's the deal? Like, what should we feed our kids? Should they go low-carb? How low-carb should they go? What do we need to do?
I actually don't think that all kids need to go low carb. Not at all. I think, keeping them away from junk and sugar and teaching them healthy eating habits from the beginning. But I find, I don't even think that all adults need to go low carb. It really depends on the person, how active you are, how you respond to food. For kids, I don't believe, I have a niece and nephew. I actually have several on the other side of the country, but they all eat regular diets, not low fat, not low carb. They have some sweets here and there, but they're nutritious diets, primarily composed of whole foods, and they do great. They're active, they're smart, they're healthy. I think one population that can benefit from low-carb diets are people with diabetes, children with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. So that's a different, because it's tough. And this is one area where I think that having sugar-free treats for those kids is good, because it makes them, like for a birthday party, they can have a cake, they can have, and again, not doing it all the time, but just it's just so much better for them, especially once they become teenagers, and they develop insulin resistance. The amount of insulin they all need to take to cover high carb foods can lead to weight gain. It can cause problems with increased risk for heart disease and other issues. So I do feel that people with diabetes of any type should be on a low carb diet, and with children it can be modified a little bit to what I would recommend for adults.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that the kids can have like potatoes, like normal potatoes, not just sweet potatoes, and what about grains and things?
Again, I think it depends on the kid. I do think that a lot of kids can tolerate those just fine. But if you want them to be on a lower carb diet and you want to remove those foods, I think that's okay too. And you can, focus more on sweet potatoes and fruit, and maybe like squash and getting carbs that way. If you'd rather just not even introduce them to grains at all, we certainly don't need grains. But you know, when I was a kid, peanut butter sandwiches, my favorite thing. I don't know what my childhood would have been like without them. I'm not sure what I would have been eating instead. But oh, that's the thing. Have you ever tried to make low carb bread, and do you have a good recipe? Because I don't.
Absolutely not. And my kids absolutely run away from the kitchen when I'm trying to modify anything into low carb. So, you know, I'm also learning through this process, and especially being a mum and not wanting my kids to be so different. I do try and stick to whole foods and things most of the time, but I'm also realizing that every now and then, if they do have something, it's not going to kill them or me, which is great. I wanted to just ask you one thing about the protein. So you were saying earlier 70 to 100 grams of protein for a woman on a low-carb diet. So I went out for steak with my husband the other night. The smallest portion on the menu was a 220-gram steak. And obviously I finished it because I'm one of those people that finishes everything on my plate.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, we've given such big portions. When you said 70 or 100 grams, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to starve to death.
Well, this is a little different. So 70 to 100 grams of pure protein. So your 220 gram, so I have to convert that to ounces in my head now. So because per ounce, which is about 30 grams, you get about 7 grams of pure protein.
Okay.
So you can really get 220 grams of pure protein.
Yeah.
Emily, can you do that?
Yeah, it's basically, so your steak, Karen, was 220 grams in weight, but the absolute amount of protein in there probably would have been about, off the top of my head, say about 35 grams of protein.
So how do we know how to calculate this?
Well, as I said, for about a 30-gram portion, it depends on how fatty the meat is. It could be anywhere from probably 4 to 7, well, maybe 5 to 7 grams of protein in that 30-gram portion. Mm-hmm. So 30 grams is about an ounce. So, and if you look it up online, you can see this. Like if you look up a 100-gram portion of meat, it will tell you how much actual protein is in there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's what it is. It's by weight versus by the amount of true protein that's in there, because there is some water and connective tissue and other things in that protein that you're getting in addition to the pure protein. So you didn't get as much. 220 grams of pure protein, though, I have a feeling if you'd had that much on your plate, there's no way you would have been able to finish it. You would have gotten sick like halfway through it.
Got it. That's very interesting. I mean, that's really hasn't come up that often, that pure protein versus the protein weight.
A lot of people, I was just going to say a lot of people that I've worked with get confused about that. And when you say have a 100-gram steak, they think you mean the protein amount, but it's not. So if you're looking at packaging, when you look at the back of the packaging, so something might weigh 200 grams, but look at how much protein is in it, not just the weight of the meat. Does that make sense?
Okay, awesome. Got it. So, Franziska, a typical day on a low-carb approach, keeping it real, what would that look like?
Okay. Breakfast, I think eggs are just one of the best foods ever, so you can't go wrong starting with eggs. Eggs and bacon or sausage or just eggs. And then I just like to include some kind of vegetable at every meal. So either some kale or some sauteed mushrooms or spinach. And then, you know, depending on the amount of carbs that you want to do in the morning, you can have some berries. I usually have some berries along with that. And then coffee or tea with some cream. You know, sometimes I do sardines in the morning too. Sardines, again, with some vegetables. Usually I make a little salad out of tomatoes and cucumbers and some olive oil and vinegar. And that's really tasty. If you like canned or tinned fish, you can do salmon or mackerel as well. Lunchtime, you know, again, some kind of protein. When I'm at home, I like Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt has less carbohydrates than regular yogurt, and it's got more protein. If you get the plain type, I don't know if you have flavored there, but you know, when I say Greek yogurt over here, it could mean, you know, lots of jelly in the yogurt and different toppings. I mean plain Greek yogurt, nothing in it but just the yogurt. And I usually have that mixed with some avocado and grains. Emily, did you have that when you were?
I was just about to say I can vouch for 100% what Franziska eats because I stayed with her for, was it 2 or 3 days? I got to see exactly what was on a day, and we had for lunch, we had the Greek yogurt mixed with avocado, rocket or arugula in the States, and then I think we had some tomatoes as well for it, if I remember rightly.
Which one?
I think we had some tomato as well, if I remember.
Oh yes,
I think so. And then well, we ate out of those evenings as well. So you might have to say what you normally cook, but we did eat low carb when we went out as well. So
yeah, usually some type of meat. I think we went to Mexican a couple times. We had steak, fish, and then some kind of vegetables. And I think I talked about it earlier. This hot cocoa tea that I do, you can do it with no sweetener. You could use caffeine tea, but I use like an herbal tea, either an herbal chai tea or an herbal rooibos tea. I think rooibos is from South Africa.
Yay! One of the few amazing things.
It's so good for you. I love it. I drink it all the time. And what I do is I get like the red bush rooibos tea, and I add a little bit of cocoa powder to it, and you can put sweetener in or not, and then some half and half for cream, and you just mix it all together, and it's delicious. So I have that. And Emily can vouch for this too. I have that whenever I'm home and having a meal. I usually have that at the end. And that's that's a little bit of carbs, but it's also a lot of fiber. So I'm getting small amounts of carbs from the vegetables, fruits. I also have nuts fairly often too. Sometimes at a meal. I don't really snack in between meals, but if I did, it would be on something like nuts or maybe some cheese. But that's, I eat pretty much the same all the time. I don't really veer from that, and I would say it's probably somewhere between 30 and 40 grams of digestible carbs per day, and a very good mix of animal and plant foods. And I love it. I've been doing this now for almost 5 years, and I just, I can't imagine eating any other way. I feel so good. It's great.
And you look ridiculously gorgeous as well. So that's like another reason to actually follow it. But what is the deal with coffee?
With coffee?
Yes.
Yes. Coffee is great as long as you limit it to probably no more than 3 cups a day. And some people can only do 1 cup a day, and some people can't do any. If it causes you to be jittery at all, if it causes any kind of stomach distress, or you're not sleeping well and you're drinking more than a couple cups of coffee a day, I would cut back. Some people can drink a cup of coffee and they say they go to sleep, but it doesn't affect them at all. I know it affects me. So I probably do 1 or 2 cups a day, and I use instant. If I'm drinking regular brewed coffee, it'd probably be more like 1 cup. How much coffee do you drink?
Oh gosh, that's my massive problem at the moment, is that I literally survive on coffee, and it's the last addiction that I need to break. But I probably have about 5, 6 cups a day, and I was having it with cream at the beginning, heavy whipping cream. And when I added up how much cream I was having, it was insane. It was literally insane. No wonder I got so porky. Because even though I was supposedly like low carb and in ketosis, I was having way too much fat. Really, way too much fat.
The cream and butter and coconut in coffee is very, very easy to overdo it on.
Yes.
It is. Yeah, they say this is a keto drink and there's no carbs and it's great and it keeps me full. And it does keep you full, but again, you're not getting any protein in there, so you're going to have to eat later, and your appetite is probably going to be, you're going to want that protein that you didn't have at that meal, but you had a lot of calories at the meal. So, but did you say you were getting porky? I've never seen you look I'm not sure the term you use, but you always look so svelte to me and beautiful, so I don't know what you're talking about.
No. I was getting quite porky, but thanks, I do appreciate it. But what the thing is, I was literally just drinking my fat, like drinking it and like having bulletproof coffee, and then an hour later having coffee with heavy whipping cream, and then, it was just kind of like just drinking and drinking and drinking all this fat, and I didn't realize just how bad it was. for my weight. And I'm sure internally it was doing some other stuff as well to have all that fat, just drinking it.
Yeah, and the other thing about drinking your calories, and I'm not sure if, I'm pretty sure Emily learned this in school too, is it's just not a good thing. Your brain doesn't really register the calories the same way.
It's not satiating. Yeah.
Down, prepare, and chew up and digest. It hits your body all at once, and especially like coconut oil and cream, those are, well, mostly coconut oil, but the short-chain fatty acids are metabolized pretty quickly. So those drinks can be, even though there's no sugar in them, I mean, it's still much better than something you would get at Starbucks, one of those drinks that, tons of sugar and fat. But yeah, you can certainly gain weight by drinking a lot of the bulletproof coffee and the coffee with cream. It tastes so good, though. I know, it does taste good. I use half and half, though, and I find that half and half, you're getting, just a little bit of carb, very little, and it still whitens up your coffee nicely. So you might. Do you have half and half down in?
Yes. Well, we have in South Africa. It's just like full fat milk or 2% fat milk or something like that. So we do that. I have switched to that recently. So watch this porky's face.
Karen.
You look beautiful. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway. Franziska, we've got to end soon. Do you have any more questions?
No, I think I've covered everything I wanted to ask. Yeah.
Just the top 3 tips you have for people trying to quit sugar. Like literally those people who are still using sugar, who think that life without sugar is just not worth living. Do you have 3 tips for them?
Oh my goodness. Yes, make sure that you are eating a very, at each meal you're getting plenty of protein and healthy fat. Having those, those macronutrients in place is going to help your hunger signals. And this is tough for sugar. I would say if you're trying to get rid of sugar completely, then just get used to foods. Try for one day, no sweets at all. I would say maybe try to do it gradually. Have a day that you don't have any sweets, and then kind of evaluate how you feel versus the days that you have sugar, and then finally maybe after you've done that, kind of get it down to one day a week where you can have some sugar, and again, see how you feel after you've had that day, after having 6 days of no sugar and just healthy foods, and then the day of sugar. And how you wake up the next morning feeling, and just really pay attention. It can be so difficult when you're ingrained in sugar, and it's around everywhere now. It's really hard to avoid. So I think it kind of has to be a gradual thing, and don't beat yourself up if you won't go 3 days without eating sugar and then you do eat sugar. It's just like low carb. The next day you get right back into I'm not going to do sugar today, because I don't like the way it makes me feel, and I don't want to be prisoner of any food.
I think that's an amazing way to end on that last one, is that don't beat yourself up. We all do it. We could probably all put our hands up and say we've all been there when we do it, and it's just about getting back on with that the next again day. So.
Fabulous. Well, that's us on the Sugar Free Show with myself and Emily Maguire, and we had the amazingly gorgeous, fabulous, wonderful Franziska Spritzler with us. She has a wonderful book. You can check her links in the comments below. So get that book and get on track and join our sugar-free revolution. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.